Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and today I'm here with a long-awaited, at least for me, or long worked on, full guide to the Darkoath Savagers and the Tarantulos Brood. These are the two warbands that come with the Warcry Red Harvest box, the new hotness. Um, yeah, I wanted to make sure that I got a full game in with them before I gave the final kind of verdict and guide to them. So I'm excited to get into it. I do want to talk a little bit first about my kind of first impressions with the set. Um, and the first one, especially building the two warbands, is just an incredible amount of build options. This is the first, I think, Warcry specific warband where I've gotten the sense that they want this to be something that you have for the long haul, that you buy multiple boxes of. Maybe they're sort of building it with AOS in mind. Um, I've heard, a few rumors or speculations that the next Slaves to Darkness battle tome is going to get rid of regular marauders that are just old and replace them with the cultists. So maybe these boxes are trying to be more complete in case that you buy them for AOS, where you'd have multiple ones. Because every single fighter, except for the Broodmaster and the Spiders, every single fighter has multiple options for the build. Like the torsos are mono pose, mono torso, but then they all have different like arm or weapon options, or like, for example, the God Speaker has uh, sort of multiple different hand options and two different heads. Stuff like that, where almost every single character just has a few different ways you can build them, which I think is really cool. It lets you put a ton of your own spin, your own flavor on these warbands, which I think is amazing. So really impressed with just like the build quality, the just the hobby level that's on display with these warbands. I was originally a little bit bored with the sort of barbarian aesthetic of the Darkoath Savagers. Um, I still would totally forgive anyone for still feeling the same. I will say that I like these better than I think as an attempt at just sort of the basic Warhammer barbarians. I think that these are kind of honing in on the best version of that compared to other ones they've done. Although I do still love the Untamed Beasts. But I think I like these better than the Spire Tyrants. I think I like these better than Phaedra's Hunt, even though those are kind of similar. Um, yeah, I think that they're really solid, and at least the way they've been built, at least from like a workmanship, an options point of view, poses, I think is really, really well done. Um, I also do want to say that in my games, I noticed they play out noticeably differently than the base set, which is really cool. I think that these warbands are very evenly matched in Red Harvest, which I think is wonderful. I think that's really good. I do think Tarantulos are a little bit ahead in the objective missions, but not so far that Darkoath can't win. And there's also two missions that have nothing to do with objectives, and I think Darkoath might even be favorites there. Um, but what's cool is that I think that Tarantulos are significantly better in the base game than Darkoath are in the base game, and I'll get to some of the reasons why in a second. But it's going to be really cool for players sort of picking this up. It's going to be a really easy way to spot how Red Harvest is different than the base game by playing with these warbands and seeing how, you know, Tarantulos being the kind of thing that dominates in the base game and then being on very even footing with Darkoath in this one is going to be pretty cool. There's also some things that they've done with Tarantulos to make it close in one box. I do think if you got multiple boxes of Tarantulos, it'd be a little bit tougher. Um, Also, wanted to talk about the terrain. It's really amazing to play with. Very difficult to assemble, though, specifically the bucket tower. You can see that kind of in the center of the screen here. It's two towers that are connected only by the buckets. You can't tell here looking at it from the screen, but the only thing connecting it is the seven buckets, and the glue job on that is very difficult. So be prepared. So finally, let's get into the warbands. I'm going to start with the Darko Savagers. I do like how they play. In general, their whole thing is about getting stronger over time. And that's why they play so well in Red Harvest, is because these 4 round matches are going to be sort of working well for them. They'll also play really well into Catacombs because Catacombs has some 5 round matches, and that's going to go well with their abilities. Um, so the two things that do that are sort of vows and visions. So a vow fulfilled lets you pump up um, your stats, and then the visions ability from the God Speaker. So I'll talk more about those later, but I think they both play into this idea of kind of investing in your future during the game, which I think is cool. I think that plays really well with the sort of oaths, these swearing dark oaths. An oath is a promise about the future. So I love that it's sort of playing with the tempo aspect of the game. That's some design space we haven't really seen. um, they also have a big focus in their abilities on leveraging kills. They have multiple abilities that only trigger when you get a kill. So it's funny, they make you plan for the late game, but play aggressively, which is interesting. I think you're going to want to like really aggressively attack your opponent's weakest models to start off to get strong enough to be able to tangle with their strongest models. Um, they also have this Furious Rampage thing. I'll talk more about that later too, but um, these guys are kind of all about defending choke points, I think, when you actually play with them. They're pretty slow, so they're not going to be able to sort of fly to the most important objective on the board. So you really want to sort of constrain the board as much as you possibly can. And they're sort of empowered to do this by the red harvest boards being really cramped. You can see here down at the bottom, um, there's sort of lava and terrain going on in Red Harvest, and there's more terrain than usual. Um, and that's true on the terrain cards as well. So the boards are pretty cramped if you're not flying or sort of jumping right up onto the terrain right away. And I think you really need to take advantage of that when you're playing Darkoath. Uh, let's talk about actually building them in the box. The big one is the two proven. So there's the woman who can be axe or spear, and then there's the Conan guy who can be either a sword or a flail. Um, the sword and flail are really close as far as to which one is better. So I'll just talk about the trade-off, right? So it's 1 2/3 damage per attack against toughness 3. For the sword, and then the flail, the bonus is that 3 inch range versus the 1 inch range, and then the flail is also 5 points more expensive. Um, so that's really close as far as the value of 3 inch range versus the damage. Um, I often go for damage because I think that range is sort of uh, it's most valuable on things that already do damage, and the flail is a little bit weaker, but in terms of output. So I generally go damage wise. I did in my game have one moment when I wished that I had the flail on the board, which tells you how close it is, and then I was able to kind of play very patiently and activate that guy last and eventually find a place to leverage the extra damage. But so when playing, I think it's really going to be playstyle dependent there. Um, for spear versus axe, the difference in damage, the spear is only 1 damage behind per attack on toughness 3. So I prefer the spear. The 2 inch range is obviously good, same way that the 3 inch one is. I do think that the jump from 1 to 2 in range is much bigger than the jump from 2 to 3, which is why, I think I value the spear way higher than the axe. Um, so I guess for both debates also, I just prefer the cheaper one for more sort of list building flexibility. Save there and put the points elsewhere. But I absolutely respect people wanting to use the flail instead of the sword, because that to me is really just a playstyle difference. Now for Glory Seekers, those are the small ones in Darkoath. Um, you're going to be fine as long as you don't build shields, really. The shields are absolutely terrible. It's half the damage of the other ones for just a slight durability increase, not actually very much at all. +1 toughness with some especially higher hit point fighters, that can make a real difference in terms of the number of activations it takes to kill them. But for sort of low hit point fighters, toughness matters even less. So putting those shields out there really does not help. And that's, generally true in Warcry. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know that. Now, spear and axe versus two axes or two swords, either one, versus one big axe, I think is a pretty interesting debate. The paired weapons do the most damage on their own. Um, the spear has a bunch of utility, both in that the range 2 is always nice, but mostly because it's the cheapest, it gives you more flexibility when list building, which I think is really important. Even though the spears, as you're playing with them, the less damage is noticeably a problem. Have a bit of a wet noodle problem, but I think that the flexibility they give you is good, and range 2 you can always use it. One big axe is kind of stuck in between. It does less damage on its own, more with onslaught, of course, but in normal circumstances, and I'll talk about the exception to this in a bit, but in normal circumstances, using onslaught on one of your weaker characters is a bit of a waste, and so you really don't want to use it. So, using that big axe, I would say there's one sort of combo playstyle that you can do with Darkoath that I'll talk about in the list section, in which you do want to build as many big axes as possible, if that sounds fun to you. But otherwise, I would say avoid the big axe and do all either two weapons, either spear or hand weapons. I would do a mix of both. So let's talk about their abilities, because I alluded to them a few times. So the first one, and I think the one that I think is the most compelling with them, is a vow fulfilled. And part of that is because it gets really strong in these longer red harvest games. So I would say you want to use it like absolutely anytime you think you're going to get a kill and you think you're going to survive to the next round. Because when you use it, you have to pop it before your attacks, and then you get to um, add one to either toughness, attacks, or strength. I would, at least for your first one, I would go attacks, and then you can, sometimes the math will work out that you want to add to strength, depending on who you're fighting, like if you're fighting Stormcast or something. But for the most part, um, yeah, you'll use those two stats. You do have to do it when you're reasonably confident that you're going to get a kill, because you have to pick it before the attacks. But anytime you have a fighter that you're pretty sure is going to survive till next round, I think it's worth it to use this double, especially in the first two rounds in these Red Harvest games. I do think, in round three, it might not be worth it since you only get one round out of it, but even then, it can sometimes be good. It's sort of like banking an onslaught for your next round. It also kind of changes how your opponent plays because they might all of a sudden kind of overextend to kill the thing that you've put a double on, that you've put Vow Fulfilled on. Um, so, that can be good as far as creating a distraction card effects for people, just something scary that your opponent gives more attention to than it really deserves. Because really, think about this as like banking an onslaught for future rounds, but you get one every round. So like the first round, you get it once and you've broken even and it's like using onslaught, which by the way is like the ability that essentially defines this game. Um, and then if you get it in two rounds, you've essentially doubled your investment. So um, just really good there if you can find a spot to leverage it in the early rounds, and then also really amazing on the Slaughterborn, the leader. Uh, Another double, Display of Brutality. This one, a ton of warbands have it. It's fine, when you get a kill. Um, yeah, it's fine. It's solid. You'll use it. Every warband that has it uses it sometimes, but it's not that exciting. I would say use Vow over it unless it's round 4. Like if you're pretty sure you're going to get a kill, most of the time I think you're going to get more value out of Vow, but there's going to be very specific moments when that's not true. Uh, the triple, Furious Rampage, really good with 3+ targets. That's when your EV is somewhere around 5 or so. Obviously depending on what you've rolled, but um, you know, your chances of doing damage is really high once you've got 3 up targets. And so it's really good in the Red Harvest box set games because Tarantulos comes with 13 fighters, so they're flooding the board. So, and like I said before, the Red Harvest boards are cramped. They create a lot of choke points. You're going to want to position your very slow Dark Oath people into the choke points. A lot of the time, you'll find a choke point that is much closer than a objective, and that your Tarantulos opponent is going to need to get through to get to the objective. And so you're going to want to block them off that way, and then use Furious Rampage in these big team fights that happen around these kind of hot spots in the map. Um, just remember, pop it before you attack so that you know who to attack, right? Because one, there's more targets if you pop it before attacks, but two, you don't know which you're going to roll a 6 against and which you're going to roll a 1 and completely miss. So it just gives you more information before you make your um, relevant decisions. That's a piece from Magic. I think I'll probably do a video on this sort of some other time of sort of lessons from other strategy games that you can take into Warcry, but an important one is sort of uh, do all the things you can't control before you make the decisions about things you can control, and then that leads you to make better decisions in the future, which is really important. So yeah, just a timing issue if you are going to use Furious Rampage. So those are kind of the fighter abilities, and then the other things that are really interesting with this warband are the God Speaker abilities. So the double, Visions of Glory. Uh, you roll a number of dice equal to the ability, and for every 5 or 6, you get another wild dice to use next round. Um, Really, really funny. So you can kind of take two different approaches with this if you decide to include a God Speaker when you're playing. Um, One is you can just use it as occasional value. So let's say round one, a lot of the time there's not a great spot to use dice, right? A lot of the time you're just positioning, and a lot of the time you use rush a lot in round one. Um, to give yourself +1 move, but maybe you get to where you're going with 8 inches of movement instead of 10, and that's fine. Um, those are times when you just wait to activate your God Speaker until the very end, and then um, just go ahead and throw out Visions of Glory to with your one last set of dice and get some value, potentially get something into the next round. The other is to use it as your primary strategy. And I wasn't the first person to think of this. I've seen some people in the Discord talk about it, but basically you use your wild dice early in round one to just get doubles on 5s and 6s. Then um, you know, very early in round one, you use Visions of Glory, and then you wait on your God Speaker. And then at the end of round one, you do Visions of Glory again now that you've waited. So you know what you've rolled, then you set up, and then you roll again to see how lucky you can get. And you can turn two doubles into about an average of like a little, maybe like 3.5. I mean, you're probably not going to have both of your doubles be 6s. 6s turns one wild dice into two on average. Um, you'll probably have like a 6 and a 5, or you might not roll a 6 with your opening priority roll, in which case this is a little rough. Because EV is kind of a funny thing, right? So if you sort of, like I said, the expected value if you've got 6s um, is two wild dice out of the one that you spent. So you can sometimes double your wild dice out of this. Really, it's like turning two into 3.5, say. Um, Now, I think that EV is a little low. And part of that is because you're not just kind of getting these investments, you're also sort of losing out. There's a big opportunity cost in the dice you've spent. But you can do some stuff, and I'll show in the list sections, you can do some stuff to kind of leverage what you do get out of it. So it can be a fun thing to try. Uh, if you roll even a little bit poorly, it will not work at all and it'll be a disaster. But, you know, play around with it. The God Speaker also has a triple Curse of Withering. It's terrible. Toughness reduction only lasts a round. Uh, the opponent actually gets an activation to react, right? Because You know, you'll drop the toughness with the God Speaker, and then your opponent gets to do something before you then attack with what you're hoping to get extra damage out of. So for a triple, that's awful. For a double, maybe you'd consider it sometimes, but for a triple, that's really disappointing. Although a lot of warbands have bad triples, so that is just a thing. The quad death blow, almost never better than onslaught. When I started this channel, I used to sort of explain mathematically the exact times when something is like the one in a blue moon time when this will be better than onslaught, or not onslaught, rampage. There's a typo there. But um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to go back to just like actually spelling out the math there, and I'll think about it for next time. Um, Okay, so the best fighters in Darko Savagers, the very best one is the Slaughterborn, which is the leader, and I think that's so cool. First, the reason it's so good, just stat-wise, it's just got really solid damage output, uh, holds Onslaught really well, as far as abilities. It also gets way more out of Val Fulfilled because it's much more likely to get a kill, and so then you can pump its stats, and then it's much scarier with a few stat pumps as well. This is one of the very few where you might want to pump the toughness depending on your opponent's strength because just keeping your Slaughterborn alive is so important. In fact, I'd say this is the only fighter where you'd be tempted to buff toughness. Uh, the thing that I think is so cool about the Slaughterborn being the best fighter in the Warband is that that's not the case for most of the Warcry warbands. Most of them, the leader is actually one of your weakest units, which really holds them back when, getting multiple boxes to try to sort of min-max them a little bit, to kind of keep up with some of the AOS warbands, right? There's sort of a meme that the Warcry warbands can't keep up with the AOS ones. I fight against that meme all the time because Corvus Cabal absolutely can, Splintered Fang absolutely can, and Untamed Beasts kind of can. But like the thing that holds Untamed Beasts back, they've got their amazing combo, right? They've got their Prowler that runs around biting people. They've got their Beast Speaker that doubles the Prowler up. Um, they've got Plains Runners, which are really solid. But no matter what you do with Untamed Beasts, you're still paying 180 points on this awful Heart Eater that, is just it's 180 points, I think, for like a model that's worth 140, really. Uh, so you're kind of just 40 points down no matter what you do with Untamed Beasts, which is too bad. Darko Savagers don't have that problem. Slaughterborn is an amazing leader. It's not like absolutely one of the best leaders in the game, but it's really solid as far as for a 4-inch move, just footbound hero really, really solid and pretty aggressively costed. Anything under 200 points that's doing that kind of damage is pretty impressive, which means the Darko Savagers are pretty good for like bringing in allies and stuff to pump them because, you know, some warbands like Iron Golems, there's only so good they can get because their leader is so bad. Um, but Darko Savagers take allies really well, and they also take, improvements really well. So, for example, Spire Tyrants have better chaff, and so do Scions of the Flame. They have much better chaff than Darko Savagers do. Not much better, but a little bit better. The little I can't remember the names for some reason, but the little ones on those warbands are just a little better than Glory Seekers. Um, but you know, getting multiple boxes of Darko Savagers, I think will actually yield you potentially a better warband, because your leader is better, so just your ceiling is a little higher because that's the one thing that has to be in the warband. Um, Also, for Glory Seekers, I think that Glory Seekers with paired weapons, their stats are the best ones point for point. Um, but again, I'm gonna get into the list building section where there's multiple builds that are different based on what you're trying to do with your list. Uh, but I did just want to point out there that Glory Seekers with just two weapons, if you're just going straight forward, which is the best one point for point, it's that one. Um, I would say proven in general. Unfortunately, they're sort of some of the coolest sculpts. The one with, I guess he's technically like a Wrathborn, but he's same size as the proven, similar damage. But the guy with the claws, um, the guy, you know, all four of the different proven options, they're all a little bit underwhelming for the points. I think it's tempting to take one because their triple is, pretty decent, but uh, not amazing. I don't think I would take it if I was getting competitive, for example. Um, so let's talk about lists. I keep alluding to this. For one box, the way I would do it is doing Slaughterborn, Godspeaker, Claw Guy, and then I would go Spear and Sword, and then five Glory Seekers with two weapons. Just because if you're just going straight forward, um, the Glory Seekers with two weapons are the best stat for stat. So I would just make the choices that allow you to um, sort of boost that up. But that's not how I built mine, because I'm planning on doing it with an ally. Uh, because Dark Oath, like I said before, they take allies so well. So I think I would put in a Mind Stealer Spheranx. You have room to go either version of the Conan, which is the one with the long brooding hair, sword or flail, and then I would have two spear and axe, three with two weapons, and then the claw guy. I just think that the Mind Stealer just fits so perfectly, and then um, yeah, I would take out the God Speaker because, paying a 115 point tax, because the God Speaker without the ability essentially does nothing. So in my opinion, if you're going to actually keep it in there, uh, it's really only worth it if you're going to make it your whole strategy. Another alternate build I just wanted to talk about, uh, you could put in sort of the flail, um, and then do just one with spear and axe. I think this is the one that I actually have built right now. Or no, I have two Glory Seekers with spear and axe. So just a few different ways. They did a really nice job with the points. There's just a bunch of different ways that one box kind of all tessellates up to 1,000 points. If I was going to get two boxes of this and not have an ally, I'd just go with two Slaughterborns right away. I think the Slaughterborn is your best fighter, and you'd really want to focus on that. And then I'd have the Wrathborn, and then just eight Glory Seekers, just kind of putting as much sort of beef onto the battlefield as I could, and then just having my three tough guys. I think Red Harvest in general kind of encourages you. I talked about this in my scenarios video, but the deployments kind of encourage you to actually have. Um, a semi-elite fighter in each deployment group because the deployments are so balanced, as opposed to being shield heavy. Um, However, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the other way to play Darko Savagers. Now, you could get really competitive and do this with a Contorted Epitome, or it works really well with a Mind Stealer Spheranx as well. The Epitome is kind of the arch enemy of the Spheranx because it's just the sort of really competitive version of what the Spheranx does. The Spheranx is a little more casual, a little more fun. It's like better at some things, but those are things that aren't as good in competitive play. Um, but yeah, so this is if you just make your whole strategy around using your God Speaker to just get as many wild dice as possible. Um, so you just have a Slaughterborn, one of your allies. So these two work so well because they use a lot of dice. The Epitome has a triple, and you really want to use the triple every round. And then the Spheranx has a double and a triple and a quad, and you really want to like have a real choice. You want to be using a set of dice for the Spheranx every single round. Um, so you would, double use the Godseeker speaker in at least rounds one and two, and then just try to bank as many wild dice as you can later on. For this kind of build, you're going to want to use the big axe because it takes onslaught really well. So you're just going to spam onslaught across all of your big axes. And so, like I said before, normally you don't want to be using onslaught on cheap models because your points value is just low that way, right? Like one extra attack from a small weapon, a not very powerful fighter is just not doing as much as like just blowing out your attacks characteristic on like a big powerful model. Um, but in this case, you're just going to have dice to spare, hopefully, if things go well. And so you're going to be wanting to use Onslaught on your cheaper fighters too. And so that's why you're going to want to use your big axes. Really cool combo. Sailor in the Warcry Discord came up with it. Um, I was pretty skeptical at first. I still don't think it's the most competitive build. I know he actually won a Polish Warcry tournament recently, but he's won that tournament against that same crew a bunch of times. So I think just Sailor is just a lot better than at Warcry than his friends are, and he can beat them with a ham sandwich whenever they show up to a tournament, or at least in his town. I think he's just probably the strongest player and can win with most solid lists. Um, not to say that they're bad. I've actually seen some kind of innovative lists come out of there that aren't this player, but I do think that that's a little bit of what's happening there. But I do think the combo is really cool. Um, the only thing I would say is the EV on Visions of Glory, if you roll poorly just once, like if you have a game where you roll below expectation in the first round, it's really just, is your Spheranx or Contorted Epitome able to kind of single-handedly carry you? Because if you roll poorly, you really only have, well, one, you have the opportunity cost of you didn't use those dice. So now your Slaughterborn, who really wants to be using Vow Fulfilled in rounds 1 or 2, you know, you didn't use dice on Vow Fulfilled, and now your Slaughterborn isn't the kind of giant beat stick it can be. Um, and then, it's like, can your Spheranx or Epitome single-handedly save you? Probably not. But if you roll above EV, you can do some really nutty stuff with this list, which I think is really cool. It's not the kind of thing for me because it's so high variance. Um, but you know, it's going to be fun if you like that kind of gameplay. I think you can have a lot of fun with this. So think about what kinds of games you want to play with your Dark Oath. Do you want to do these ability combo lists? If so, just build them with as many big axes as you can. But if you're not interested in that, I would say that the ones with two weapons, the spear and axe, or the two like axe plus sword would be better. Uh, One other note, you could run this list with two fewer glory seekers with spear and axe, and then one more. What do you call it? One of the proven, and then that would let you get your other triple. And sometimes you'd actually get so many wild dice later on that you would actually have two triples to use for both your proven and your epitome, your mirror. Um, but yeah, you can run it either way. I tend to like more bodies, but either one's totally fine. All right, so that is all of the Dark Oath, and now we're going to get on to Tarantulos. Okay, so let's start with the playstyle for them. Um, Tarantulos they actually did a really good job, I think, making Tarantulos play like you would think a spider themed group would. They're sort of swarming all over the place, incredibly aggressive, but pretty squishy. And, like spiders, they're very intelligent. They have like some really relevant tricks here. Um, so, with a Tarantulos Warband, you're going to be coming in with kind of waves of aggression. You have some really solid like glass cannon pieces for the sort of human side of your warband, where you have to be really careful with them actually because they can be squished, but you can really move around. And then spiders are sort of your exception. Spiders should be all out attacking all the time. I'll get into it later, but there's a ton of incentives to make you kind of use this warband to just throw your spiders forward recklessly and then use your other fighters to try to kind of pinpoint, scalpel, any kind of sort of way in which that intense spider aggression is throwing your opponent off balance. You then use your other fighters like a scalpel to try to take advantage of that. You also get a ton of movement plays, which helps you again like force your opponent to deal with the spiders, run around, get the treasures, get the objectives, run around, get to the unit you're hunting, something like that. Um, so yeah, just a very tricksy aggro playstyle, which I think is cool, right? For the most part, um, in most strategy games, being tricksy is generally associated with control, um, those kinds of defensive reactive playstyles. And this is a very combo, tricksy oriented aggro playstyle, which I think is really cool. Um, so let's talk about, what should you do when you're just building your first group of them. Um, the first thing to note is the Broodkin with the Scythe is a bottom 5 fighter in all of Warcry. Literally one of the worst uh, cards that they've ever produced. It does no damage. It has range 2, but um, range 2, it's funny. I've said this in a couple videos, but range 2 is incredibly relevant on anything that does damage. It's incredibly irrelevant if you do no damage because showing up at range 2, they don't have to waste a activation disengaging from you. So if they can just ignore the damage you deal, they're not going to fight you, right? The only reason to fight you then is to maybe clear a body off an objective, but it just means you don't achieve anything any of the time. So, you know, the scythe is terrible, but luckily the box comes with 4 sets of daggers and 5 sets of, I guess they're called sai, but these sort of mini tridents. Um, so you can snip the hands off of the ones holding the scythes and uh, stick on better weapons. One of them is really easy to do that with. Uh, Two of them are actually really, really difficult because they're sort of two-hand holding their scythe in front of them. And so if you put the sets on, it's hard to make them work properly. But um, so I left 2 on, but one was pretty easy to do. Uh, the scythe being so terrible, though, I think is I think it was a balancing thing. The 2 warbands out of the box play very very evenly. And I think part of the reason they're so evenly matched is because Tarantulos is just wasting 3 fighters who are just absolutely terrible on the board. So their 13 to 10 fighter advantage is so much smaller because, they've got these 380-point fighters that are really worth about 60 points. So they're just starting 60 points behind. Um, which makes them really even because we'll talk about later with the spiders, how they also get to be 100 points ahead. So anyway, Broodkins with daggers are a tiny bit better point for point than the Sai. They're 5 point cheaper and they barely do less damage. The most important damage per activation, obviously being against toughness 3. They only do 1/6 of a damage less per attack, and then you know the daggers do a little less for toughness 4, but they actually do more damage against toughness 5 than the Sai do for 5 points cheaper. So I'd say point for point. Um, load up on daggers before you load up on the Sai, because they're cheaper and the damage is essentially the same. Although, if you love those mini tridents, if you love the look of the mini tridents, they're still pretty solid point for point. So don't worry about it too much. The Doom Weavers. The nets are amazing. The net ability is amazing. I will talk about this more later, but the Doom Weaver with net is amazing. Both of the Doom Weaver torsos have the option of being net or flail. So just build them both with nets. Um, the only thing, it's kind of funny because the flail version actually has really good stats, but just why would you ever give up on the net? You never would. Um, so that's how I would build them. Everything else is kind of sort of done for you. Those are the only decisions to make in the box, but um, you know, some important stuff there. Let's talk about their abilities, right? So it's all about their cute baby spiders. Um, but do not, do not be sort of softened up by these sort of incredibly cute baby spiders that are all over the warband. Here's one of them that comes in there, you know, obviously seems not threatening, but it will ruin your whole life. Uh, so their abilities come in 2 different types, spider combos and mobility shenanigans, and there's sort of 2 relevant abilities for each. They have, the full thing of 6 abilities, but the other 2 are just bad. Envenomed projectile, you'll use it sometimes, but uh, not very often. Um, and then Gifts of the Eightfold Watcher is their quad. It's another one like Darkoath where it's almost always worse than just using Rampage, so just use Rampage. Um, okay, so Scuttling Symbiosis. It's a bonus attack or move for a spider nearby. Now, only your non-spiders can use it. Um, so they just need to pick a 6-inch away spider, and then that spider can either move again, which is great because they move 6 inches, or it can attack again. Um, they have 8 attacks. Uh, they only do 1 damage or 2 on a crit, but with 8 attacks, it means they have a very consistent damage profile. They pretty much never whiff. Um, and they're going to average 4 damage against any toughness. So the spiders actually just completely blow toughness 5 fighters just completely off the board. It'll just like completely annihilate any high armor warband. Um, so Scuttling Symbiosis is really nice there. Onslaught often is just worth like 2 damage, because it's one more dice roll, and on average that'll do 2. So having a double that is worth either 6 inches of movement or 4 damage on average is just really, really good rate. Um, then, Creeping Summons for a triple. You bring a dead spider back. Really strong. Not like as crazy as, say, the Night Haunt version of this ability. Now, Night Haunt struggle on in Warcry for other reasons, but Creeping Summons, spiders are incredible. They're way undercosted, but even then, right? Spiders should cost 60, 65 points. Um, but instead they cost 35. So think of this as you're being worth bringing back a 65 point fighter. You'd still do it. It's just not quite as amazing as like Night Haunt being able to bring back, you know, uh, 200 point fighters that should cost 150 points, but it's still a 150 point fighter is still worth more than a 65 point one, essentially. Um, Still, it's really solid with how your playstyle is going to go of sending all your spiders forward right away, having them creepy crawl all over your opponents, get killed, because they only have 8 health. Um, for their points, they're incredibly tough and difficult to kill, but just in general, they're gonna die. And then bringing them back to just shoot them forward again. It's just a really cohesive playstyle, all created by these 2 abilities. And then when you're not doing your spider stuff, you have a lot of mobility shenanigans to play with. So the Silken Strangle Nets, that's the double from the Doomweaver with a net. Um, this is why you don't ever skip on the net, why you wouldn't play the flail. It's just so solid. 3-inch range, 66% hit rate. Um, you have 2-inch range on your weapon, and you do, pretty respectable damage. So you can do the thing of walk up to them, net them, and then stab them, and then they can't even attack you back because they can't move. Um, which is honestly like busted. But they cost 105 points. It's not the worst. But it absolutely makes them, playable even in the most competitive versions of this. You also have Skittering Ascent. Doomweavers and Broodmasters get this. It just means that height, climbing up doesn't hinder movement, which I think is just really valuable. And your Doomweavers, your Broodmasters, they're going to use this a lot. It means they can climb anything uh, for just a double. It's just really often used, especially in Red Harvest, where all the terrain is just so high. Um, so yeah, just 2 really solid sets of abilities, um, you know, giving you 2 kind of ways to be tricky with this warband. Let's talk about their top fighters and let's get into the spider debate here. Spiders have speed, they move 6 inches. They have damage, they average 4 damage against anything they're attacking, no matter what the toughness, because there are no toughness 1 fighters out there. So they also have a ton of wounds, right? They are toughness 1, but 8 wounds is plenty. It's, you know, like I said in my Darko section, low toughness tends to matter more, low or high toughness tends to matter more for sort of beefier fighters in terms of how many activations it actually takes to kill them. Um, for an 8 wound fighter, very few things, whether it's toughness 1, toughness 2, 3, even 4, very few things are going to just one-shot kill it. Um, if you've watched my other videos, you know that the few things that can do that, I value them very highly in this game. Um, but still, so for 35 points, you can have just a mind-boggling amount of these spiders on the field, and they're all just moving 6 inches, swarming objectives, dealing 4 damage per attack to anything they want to take out. So this means that they're actually winning fights against 80-point models in the average warband. Even competitive warbands will be running like 75, 80-point chaff units that will often lose their fights to these 35-point spiders. Um, all because strength and toughness are just like criminally underpointed by GW. Um, I kind of made a joke video about this a while ago, but it's just wild. You know, four of the five best fighters in Warcry, I would say, are pets, which is just ridiculous. The spider is the most powerful fighter in the entire game. After that, I would personally say it's either giant rats or aether wings. I think I would give it to giant rats, and then after them aether wings, and then after that Potgrot, who is essentially a pet, maybe just a little sidekick. Um, but as far as like Cruel Boy's social dynamics go, I think Potgrot is basically a pet. And those are the five best fighters in the game. Probably should have actually waited until, I could do a video to blow all that out into one video, but there you go, an entire video's worth of information in 30 seconds there. Um, those are the five best fighters in the game. Four of them are pets. Oh, sorry, I didn't mention the other one that's in the top five is Contorted Epitome. Just the mirror. It's just really brutal. And then just barely outside of it would be the Thunder Fist, I think, and then Noblars after that. But anyway, back off the tangent. So yeah, four of the top five are pets. GW keeps doing this apparently. Potgrots are pretty recent too. It's the only issue, if you're talking about sort of tournament play. Um, these four units I think would need to be dealt with when it comes to tournament play if there were a ton of Warcry tournaments. As is, I think it's fine as long as in your games that if you're gonna spam one of those four pets, uh, make sure your opponent knows what you're doing and is okay with it. Let's talk about some other good units. So they have some. The Broodmaster is really solid, does great damage, is fully capable of one-shot killing chaff units, which again, totally important. 6-inch move, can have pseudo flying sometimes, um, can really sort of dictate the pace of play. I got a rampage with one in my test game, and was just honestly blown away at just like what it was able to do coming in round two from like way off the board and just traversing the entire board in one go and then one shot killing a chaff unit glory seeker and because they do great damage. So I would say the Broodmaster is really impressive. And again, just like the Slaughterborn, I do like what they're doing here as far as making the leaders actually be impressive um, so that, you can build good warbands with two boxes without, just thinking, man, if only I didn't have to run one of these crappy leaders. Um, Doomweavers with nets are also amazing. The net plus the 2-inch reach, being able to net them so they can't move, and then you're just stabbing them, is just really, really good. Um, the leader of Daughters of Cain, I think the Bloodrack Medusa, has this and is absolutely one of the scariest elites in the game. Um, Doomweavers, not elite units, 100 points, but still just these mini Bloodrack Medusas, and they're just really, really solid. Um, then getting to Broodkin, I feel bad. The ones with the scythes are obviously terrible, but the other ones are really good. If you took the actual balanced version of this, if you just nixed spiders, or if you made them worth 65 points, um, people would still talk about Tarantulos as a warband that's worth playing because Broodkin are solid. The ones with daggers, the ones with mini tridents, they're they're pretty decent. And you know, you'd be excited to play them even if you didn't have spiders. Um, they die to a stiff breeze, of course. Anytime you've got 3 toughness and 8 wounds, you're just really in danger a lot of the time. But um, that's okay because they move pretty well, 5 inches, and then they do legitimate damage for how much they cost. So they're really solid little units. Um, yeah, you just once you're buying more boxes and min-maxing, you're probably not gonna see them very much. So let's actually talk about that. Let's get into some lists. Um, I built this with one box. So in the top left, a Broodmaster, the Doomweavers with the nets, then you keep your 3 spiders, of course, and then of the 3 broodkin with scythes, I did the conversion on one of them to snip off the hands and put on some mini tridents um, because you know didn't want to play scythes. Uh, but I didn't do it with the two that are really difficult to do it with, just because I'm a weakling when it comes to conversions. So I have two of the Brewkin. I think that's what I would probably uh, recommend for people at home. If you are able to trim more of them, I would say do more of the mini tridents. The reason I would suggest mini tridents over the daggers, even though I just got done saying the daggers are better, is the mini tridents are worse because they cost more. If they cost the same, they would be better. Um, so that's why I would do the mini tridents, because the scythes cost 80 points, should cost like 60, 65. Um, the mini tridents, they cost 70, and they're actually better than the scythes. So even at 70 points, if the scythes were 70, you'd still take the tridents. So that's why I would move them to tridents, especially because you have the room points wise. With two boxes. Oh, and by the way, this list plays out great. Um, Again, you just have these two anvils dragging you down with the two scythes. But otherwise, this is a really, Tarantulas out of the box are just really functional. This Warband is going to be really good in the base game. Just really, really good in the base game, which I think is cool. So for two boxes, I would jettison just a lot of the Broodkin, which is a shame because I think they're incredible models. And I would bring in the spiders, which is a shame because I think they're awful models. Um, I would go two Broodmasters, two Doomweavers, six Spiders, and three Broodkins with mini Tridents. Only the Broodmaster, I think, can summon spiders. So I think having two and then having your spider swarm is really solid for a two-box list. I probably wouldn't. Well, yeah, I'll talk about putting in an ally later, but so for, six spiders, you have just a really clear play style of what you want to do as far as throwing your broodmasters forward right behind your wave of spiders, resurrecting the spiders, and then using your doom weavers to try to um, sort of lock down the opposing targets while, your spiders either swarm objectives or attack things, and then your broodkin sort of get to the most important spot on the board. Um, if we're talking about the way to really leverage Tarantulos to be incredibly destructive, and this would be not just in the base game, but also in Red Harvest, this would be really broken, is you have one Broodmaster, play pretty conservatively with it. You do want to keep it alive just to resurrect spiders, but um, one ally, you could do the Contorted Epitome, which let's just say now it adds to this list because Contorted Epitome is, one of the five best units in the game. It adds to any list it's in. You can take a pretty weak army or pretty weak warband, add a Contorted Epitome, and then all of a sudden you're like a real threat to win any game you're in. Um, However, I would say that it plays pretty poorly with Tarantulos. You really want to be using your triples. Resurrecting spiders is really important. And so having a epitome, it just fights for space. It would make the warband better, but it does fight for space. Um, and the one thing that Tarantulos lacks is a real dragon. Um, Broodmasters are really mobile. They can get pseudo flying for a double, um, but they're not gonna just like fly anywhere they want. It takes a lot of work. It's sort of build your own dragon using dice. And by dragon, I mean these flying sort of beat stick units that can one-shot kill chaff monsters. Uh, Enlightened Aviarchs on disc are really so they're the best dragon in chaos. They do more damage point for point to toughness 3 than anything else in the game when they're using their ability. They can, fly around. They basically solve all of the only sort of other than durability, it's the only weakness of Tarantulos that they don't have a flying dragon, and the Enlightened Aviarch as an ally solves that. I also think, this is a very narrative competitive list, right? Because I think that Tarantulos with their sort of mutating and changing into spiders, I think that's very Tzeentch. Um, and so allying in Tzeentch, I think, you could justify that narratively. Uh, your opponent might be a little ticked off with you if you say, "Oh, this is my narrative list, and it has 10 spiders and a Tzeentch guy in it." But I think you could justify it. Then I would keep the Doom Weavers. I think Doom Weavers are amazing. I wouldn't want tons of them all over the board because, how many dice are you really going to have to throw those nets around? But two Doom Weavers I think is really excellent in this list. I would do it even at the highest levels. And then you have room here for 10 spiders. So you're going only one below the maximum. You have 14 fighters in this warband. You could throw spiders everywhere. The reason I put the new quote meta in quotes is that I don't think a lot of people are going to build this list just because um, you only get 3 spiders per box. So are you really going to um, throw out like all these, all of these other models to get 10 spiders? I mean, maybe if I've heard that Tarantulos War Scroll and AOS isn't that amazing, so I don't see people sort of doing the thing of buying 3 boxes and then converting a spider from like extra spidery bits off of other fighters that they've discarded from their warband. Um, I don't think you're going to see this list a lot. You might see um, my 2 box list there, but without a Broodmaster, one less Broodkin, and then the AV Arc uh, in place there, right? You know, you might see something like that, but you're probably not going to see something with the 10 spiders. So, you know, is this really scary if there's a tournament? Yes. Like Adepticon, if they do Warcry, I think they might. Um, you know, Maybe someone's going to show up with this list and they're going to be really tough to beat. I do think it's, you know, at least as scary as any of the other pet spam lists. The 8 pot grot list, the 6 giant spider list, the 9 aether wing list. Um, all of those are kind of equally scary. I don't know where this will fit in that pecking order, but it's up there with the top ones. It's the top lists in Warcry are basically those ones, whatever your favorite contorted epitome list is, and your favorite double Thunderfist ogre list. That's sort of the scariest list in Warcry. I'll do a video kind of explaining more about what they do and what makes them so scary. Um, but for the meantime, you know, yeah, this is this is the scary way to run Tarantulos. I don't think you'll see it often. I don't think you have to worry about your friends doing this 10 spider list. I do think you have to worry about that 6 spider list though, and that is also going to be a terrifying list. That with an ally, whether it's a contorted epitome or an enlightened aviarch, uh, that 2 box list with an ally, sort of the combo of the 2 lists at the bottom here, that is a really scary thing that you might end up facing at your local game store sometime. But you won't see the like completely broken 10 spider list. So there you have it. There's the full guide to Warcry Red Harvest. I think both of these warbands bring some really cool, interesting stuff to Warcry. I really started this off. Put this as last in all of my sort of Warcry content stuff. I reviewed the scenarios and rules first because I wasn't as excited when the box came out about the warbands. Just looking at the stat cards, they were either broken, the spiders, or not very compelling, right? Like all of the Darkoath fighters, other than their leader, are pretty underwhelming just from a stat by stat perspective. Um, but once you play with them, once you get into it, uh, I think that they've created some really interesting play styles that really add to the game. Um, you know, yes, are tarantulas completely broken? Yes, but like I said before, you're not going to see that warband. You're not going to see that list very often. And I think that if you pull back just a little bit and don't run, a million spiders, but just run enough to get your playstyle going, um, I think you can do some really cool stuff with tarantulas. I do think that the kind of spider attack and recur playstyle is pretty cool. It's very competitive, and you'll want to just make sure that your opponent is running also a pretty tuned warband if you're going to play that way. But I think that if your opponent has like a really solid warband, I think you can play, a 6 spider list and have a great time. Um, and the same is true with Darkoath. I love that there's a few different ways to play them, right? You can kind of focus on your fightiest people and just use Vow Fulfilled and try to get just fightier and fightier over time. Uh, or you can do kind of the cool like combo God Speaker list, which I think is really cool. So, um, like I said before, definitely focus like decide which direction you want to go because it determines how you're going to want to build your glory seekers. But yeah, I just love that they've sort of built a warband that has two distinct playing styles that way. I think I'm just really impressed with them for doing it that way. So this turned into a pretty long one, but I think it's worth it. I think there's so much texture here and um, so much going on with these war bands that it's worth sinking into it. I really can't wait for people to sort of get games in here, and um, I think both of these war bands, because of all the build options, both of these war bands really um, they really sort of reward you for getting more boxes, which is kind of too bad from a wallet perspective. But once they sell them on their own, I think uh, people are going to have a good time with them. I think buying the AOS box is going to be really worth it for both of them, and or just buying one ally to go with your Darko Savagers if you want that combo list can be really cool. So I think you're going to have a ton of fun with it. Um, I'll come out with more Warcry strategy videos in the future. Although, finally I'm sort of through the Red Harvest thing. I can talk about other things if I want to, or I can just play more Red Harvest because I think it's a really cool variant on the base game. So we'll see what's next. It'll definitely be strategy focused. And so until then, may all your rolls be crits.